Today we're going to talk about how to use a slicer program and to prepare your 3D design for actual print on the 3D printer. So it would be great in a perfect world where we could just take an STL or an OBJ or what other file types we need and just run them right through the printer. Unfortunately, we need to run through a third program before we can start doing that. So as you know, a 3D printer lays out simple little tiny lines of filament. It gets heated up in the extruder here, comes out in noodle form, and gets laid down in the order that you specify. So what we need to do is we take a design, like our STL file here. Let's say that this is a 3D design, right? And we save it as an STL file. We pass it through the slicer program, and the one we use is called Ultimaker Kira, to make our G-code file object. Now what that is our STL file broken down into a bunch of little tiny lines up here. So the 3D printer can actually plot, coordinate, and print out whatever our design is. So let's go through that right now. I'm going to use my Simpsons house, the house I made, and I assume either it's going to be the character project or the house project that you guys decide to print out when you get the chance. I think we're probably going to do voting, so only a couple of you will get to do the houses, but we'll use my house as an example today. So first things first, I've made sure to lay all my pieces as flat as possible on the work plane. So one of the other things we have to use is something called supports. So if you have a bunch of objects that are curved or have extreme angles, you're going to have to use supports to actually support the material and make sure it doesn't fall over while it's printing. That definitely can happen, and it will. You will get to experience it firsthand at some point, I'm sure. So the supports are really going to come into effect right here in my roof, where you can see this angle that comes down. So those are going to be built up. I laid it down on the flattest, largest part of the roof I could to minimize my support usage, because the supports use the same filament. So, the less supports you have, the less likely you are to run out of filament. So there's the house all laid out. I have exported it here already as an STL file, so we don't need to do that again. And let's go take a look at what we need to do. So you can go ahead and open up Kira. I have it right here. And of course, there's my STL file right here. So you can always go File, Open, Import a project, or you can just click and drag your design in here. So here's my file. There it is, all laid out. Missing all the colors from before, but that makes sense. So now that we have it in the file, we can take a look and we can prepare it for slicing. Before we do that though, there's a couple different things to look at. First off, I have specified what the printer is. When you first open Ultimaker Kira, it's going to give you a prompt that shows you a list of different kinds of 3D printers. We use the Anycubic i3 Mega in our shop, and that's what you're going to be using on this first project. So make sure you specify that. Next thing, the Anycubic i3 Mega has a base size of 210 millimeters by 210 millimeters. So a lot of you are designing your houses large. You're going to need to shrink them down to make sure they fit on this work plane. You never want anything too close to the edge. Even if it's 210 millimeters, you don't really have 210 millimeters to work with. You want to work on the inside of that space. So let's go work some of the print settings. So the first thing you're going to want to do is work on the wall size here. I'm just going to leave it as default setting. Infill is a pretty important one. If you need an object that is going to be put on, say, a bike or a car or something that might get hit or dinged or is going to be well used and worn, you might go for a higher infill. If you're making something as a prototype just to see if the shape and the design works, then you might go for a lower infill. It's going to take a lot less time to print out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this one down to a pretty low infill, since there's not a whole lot of infill space anyway, since it's mostly just walls. If you're doing a solid object though, you're going to want to consider that. The print time is going to be considerably longer the higher the infill is. Supports. So once again, it says here, generate structures to support parts of the model which have overhangs. Once again, that will be my roof right there, so I want to make sure that's clicked. Adhesion. So this is to print a brim or a raft. I like doing this every time just to make sure that the filament's working before I start getting in on the print itself. And if you need to go to the custom settings, you can check that out. We're not going to look at that. But for now, this is pretty much how you should set up your house print. If you're doing your character design, you might want to go with a little bit higher of an infill. Otherwise, it's pretty easy to crush it. So once you do that, you can go slice, and it's going to very quickly create your program into a bunch of little tiny lines. And what's really cool is it's going to show the information here about your piece. So it estimates the time to do, like it says, inner and outer walls, all the different skins and parts of it. So ultimately, my house is going to take 4 hours and 54 minutes to print, even something that small. It's a long process. It's going to take 42 grams of filament, or 14.3 meters. And if you specify the kind of PLA or ABS we're going to be using, we will be using PLA on this one. It'll show you how much it's going to cost in euros, interestingly enough. But I think you can set that to dollars if you really want. So once we do that, we're going to go save to disk. And we'll save it onto my desktop. It's going to save as a G-code file right here as it specifies. There are other file types, but we're just going to be working with G-code today. So we'll hit save, and then it says save. And there we go. That's how to prepare. Next thing you're going to want to do for our class is, once you've made your G-code, ask me for a little tiny SD card. I will give you that. You put your file on that SD card. That's what gets put into the printer. And then from there, you can select your print, and you're good to go. Good luck.